Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you're listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
Well, welcome back, or welcome if you've not been here before. This is our journey presently through the New Testament, specifically through the life of Christ, watching over his shoulder. And we're in the book of John. We're in a long time in John, and I'm the only one feeling this probably, but it is most of our journey has been jumping between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it's, there's a lot of, you can choose Luke's version of it, but with John, he has a lot of unique content and a lot of connected content that runs longer. And so we've had multiple, I guess, starting in chapter 9, maybe even in chapter 8, we started, and now we're in 10, and there is that part. But lots of life here, lots of good stuff. Jesus is in a rather protracted conversation, and it goes back and forth between the crowd and the teachers of the law / Pharisees that he's interacting with. And he's just had a conversation where in our last episode, we looked at John 10, those first verses, about him being the sheep or the shepherd, and him being the gate and the way, and his unique dynamic. And as they're wrapping up the conversation after he finishes, the Jews have two responses, basically. And when he says Jews, so this is the common folk, I suppose. But part are saying, hey, he's demon-possessed, he's raving mad, which would be a huge, ugly accusation in their culture. And others is like, wait a minute, the things he's saying don't sound demon-possessed, and he's doing these amazing things. Demons can't open up blind eyes. And then it says in the first part of 22, then came the festival of the dedication of Jerusalem. It was winter. And so we're going to go ahead and start in verse 22, but there's this through line of the conversation of them grappling with his identity. And a part of them, you're saying something new, so it must be evil and bad. But then others like, well, wait, what are the facts of the case? And so thinking about, and you can go anywhere with this, Connor, you want, but setting us up for the conversation we're about to have, what would you say would be useful to us in thinking?
Yeah, so the only thing that's jumping in my mind right now is that this is going to be basically a continuation of the conversation, and yet John tells us that there's this time jump, as you said, and it's taking place during the festival of dedication, or Hanukkah, and then the Jews are gonna ask Jesus this question about, hey, like, be real with us. Are you the Messiah? That's my translation. Be real with us. Yo, Jesus, be real with us. Yeah. Tell us plainly. And so my mind can't help but think about one, why it's situated, why John sets up the conversation this way, why there's a continuation in this way. And it makes me think of Hanukkah and what that represented both to the people that lived the Maccabean revolt and also the Jews of Jesus' day. And so I don't know if there's anything you want to add about Hanukkah or about the Maccabees. You can do I can do a just not high level, just a broad view of it, that the temple in the 2nd century had been defiled, and the Maccabees were a family during the revolt that helped save the temple and then rededicated it, and cleansed it and helped purify it, and so it was a really big deal. It was something I held on to, and especially I want to do more work actually in how meaningful the Maccabean story is, especially because, like, one thing we talk about a lot is a lot of times, like, the silence between the last bit of the written Old Testament and the New Testament, and how long that intermediate period is. But the Maccabees, I know that, like, is both was a really big deal, and also like I want to do more work around what God was up to in that, because I haven't done a lot of studying that, but basically, yeah, broad view. So that's what's happening here. And I believe at the time there were like thoughts of or claims that the Maccabees were possibly Messiah type figures. Maybe not. I'm not 100% sure on that. Any thoughts?
Yeah. So you have a much better working knowledge of that. I was raised in a space where you didn't have internet. And so you only study the stuff they told you to study, and we didn't study the silence.
And and Maccabees, that was in the devil's Bible. So,
right? Yeah, exactly right. So I think that is rich, and I think the value of it, specifically what we're talking about today, is what is on the people's minds. Because I do think it's important to note that this first part, this is all Jewish people. And so the way I say that, I'm not suggesting every Jewish person at the time was honest, but the assumption when Pharisees are there is an agenda underneath. We've got to keep our power. And this is a threat to our power. And the Pharisees weren't idiots. These were very spiritually focused and dedicated, of followers of God. There was reality that if a Messiah, or specifically to that point, if a king, another Caesar type rose up, it could throw the whole country into upheaval and get a lot of Jewish people killed. Now, I'm not exonerating the Pharisees and the teachers of the law from what they did. I am saying there's a rationale. This is not what's happening here, though. Yeah. These are Jewish people looking, and I love that picture of when this festival came up, that they were, and I like that the New Testament honors it. I like is maybe not the right word. It's interesting to me that the New Testament honors this and names it, hey, Hanukkah, this is happening. And so I think that's interesting. But yeah, I think there's that point that's important to recognize. They're not necessarily here because they're trying to trap Jesus. Yeah. They really want to know.
Well, and I think there's we'll read here that they say, I guess this is John's amalgamation of what the collective voice is how long will you keep us in suspense? And then if you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. And I think there's a sense in which man, to give them dignity, man, I feel that all the time with God. I feel like I want, many times I have both either out loud or in my head cry out to God, stop messing around, make yourself clear, show
That's
me.
Right. Yeah.
And so this instinct, man, I want to say and again, maybe we've seen all these conversations, well, he's been clear or whatever, but the language they want to hear from Jesus is not the language he wants to give them. But at the same time, oftentimes the language that I want to hear from God is not the language that he wants to give me. And so it's I see myself in this so much because I can ask God for something or want something and he can give me a response. And then I'm just left more confused or more frustrated because it's not in the direct way that I want to be talked to or I want to be seen. And so I want to give them all the dignity in the world here.
Yeah. One of my working mantras is watch for the weird. I do think it works, and I do think works is not the right word, but I think it's one of the functional ways to walk with God's Spirit simultaneously. Me receiving the weird, wonder why God did that, doesn't usually clarify the situation, doesn't usually answer my question. It just keeps me in the game. It's oh yeah, God may be signaling here. I need to pay attention. And I think that's the same. Also, flipping it, that gives the Jews dignity, and I think that's very accurate. For Jesus, if you ever walked on eggshells, especially with religious people, Jesus gets you, Yeah. And they just talked about he's demon possessed. It's going to go ugly. This conversation will go ugly, or at least be in the edges going ugly. And I like to see the humanity of Jesus in that, is that idea that, man, this would be hard to have these conversations over and over again.
Well, I found myself, and maybe I'll cut this part out, but I found myself in situations where it's somebody's asking me a question about something, and it's man, I feel like I'm giving you the answer. I feel like I'm telling you in the truest way I possibly can tell you. With my firing story, a lot of the conversation, the small conversations that happened was what ended up in hindsight, and again, I'm not Jesus, so I wasn't speaking perfectly or without sin, but it's man, you're hearing me say something that I'm just not saying, and you want to hear these direct words, you want to hear these specific things said, and I'm giving you what I can, and I do wonder if there's a little bit in that in Jesus and just how we all communicate of part of what the people want here is completely understandable. But it's also if you're not willing to hear somebody out in their choice of how they're communicating to you, if you're not willing to try to seek and find and really understand, then you're going to miss out ultimately on them. Because is Jesus the Messiah? The answer is yes, Jesus is the Messiah. But is he the Messiah in the ways that the Jews are asking?
Yeah.
He's not the Messiah that they're asking for. And so is it just one of those reminders that communication is really hard, and also the answer to their question the answer to their question, and this goes back similar to what we talked about when was Jesus lying when he talked about whether he was going to go up to Jerusalem, where it's like, I mean, if Jesus were to say, no here, that wouldn't be true because he is the Messiah, but he's not the Messiah they're looking for, or the Messiah they want. And so I think that's just important to keep in front of us.
I love that. I could go on and on, but let's read the text. Beginning in verse 22, then came the festival of dedication at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple courts walking in Solomon's colonnade. The Jews who were there gathered around him, saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I did tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me. But you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who's given them to me, is greater than all. No one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one." I hate pausing here because it's like it's all one. But I want to go ahead and stop for the purpose of time and just, as we do, just kind of visit what amazes, what perplexes us about this. And so, Connor, you may begin. In what we read, what amazes you about this?
Yeah, so that initial part in 25, Jesus says, "I did tell you, but you do not believe. The works I do in my Father's name testify about me." And I think about in 21, the part we didn't read that you touched on, where it says, "Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" And that's the Jewish collective, according to John speaking. And I think I'm just really, I'm amazed right now about like Jesus is trying to reason on their level. He is trying to engage. This is not, sometimes you can read Jesus or you can read anybody in general and you're like, man, is he like, are these people like stage characters where like Jesus is just using people to get his point across, or Jesus needs an object lesson, or Jesus needs a foil to, stake his case. And I really don't think that. I think Jesus is directly speaking to, like, he's engaging in the conversation. He is not simply, it's not a one-sided, because sometimes you can read Jesus where there seem to be these non sequiturs or these grand points or illustrations he's making, and because he speaks in that way, and it's not yes, no, sometimes on Tuesday, like it's not like he's not answering at like a Senate committee or whatever. He is that, like, it's easy for me to think like, well, some of that Jesus is like maybe not as direct, but like in this place, I feel like Jesus would be like, no. Some of you even heard, like some of you even reasoned out like that I have good fruit. And like, I'm telling, like that good fruit, like, yes, that instinct you had, some of you had about me, about my fruit being good. And like, that's gotta be something good. I'm telling, yes. Like you are correct in that. And so for me, it's a good time. It's a good place to stop, because like, it's easy for me to like read Jesus sometimes as like the mystical floating above it all. Like he's got these grand points he's making, and he does have grand points, and he will float above them all eventually. And yet like his conversation and his rhetoric and his teaching is grounded not just in the truth, but in relationship to the people that he is engaging with. Yeah.
That weaving of, is it an object lesson for me thousands of years later? Which that statement, we make it so casually. It's like, can you imagine doing anything and then assuming they're going to be talking about this thousands of years from now? It's like,
I get scared when somebody brings up like a podcast episode from 6 months ago. Like,
right, exactly.
I don't know what that guy was.
Remember when you said, like,
no, I don't.
Yeah, exactly. I don't, and I deny it. But it's like, it's so crazy. So it's just more amazement. But yeah, I totally connect with that idea that he is weaving together these real life interactions, and he loves deeply the people in front of him. Like he's not using them as such. Simultaneously, God is writing through him, and I suppose all the writers, and that's a whole nother layer of this, John's recording of this and all that. But yeah, it's just amazing. It really is that he is able to communicate in a way that still resonates with us, that still answers our questions. Mm-hmm. And I mean, imagine if I'm trying to look at this like I've never read it before, but I've read it a bunch of times before, and it's still speaking to me somehow different. That stuns me.
Yeah. So what amazes you?
What amazes me, the sentence, I mean, it's just so amazing. So beautiful. 28, I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. And I'm like, if I'm in it's a press briefing, and I'm like, oh, Jesus, Jesus. He's like, yes. And I'm like, what about me? Like I'm a mess and I've got a history, but honestly, I'm more afraid of the potential that I'll derail. You know, I know enough people that claimed love for God and were deeply involved in ministry, that their lives imploded and they seem to just get bitter and bitter and bitter. And I don't want to be that person. And I carry a lot of fear that's going to happen to me. And he's like, no. And he's not saying I can't leave, but he's like, no one can snatch you out. You do not need to worry about that. I mean, you need to be mindful of, hey, this how the devil tempts me and how he could lead me away. But you do not have to be afraid that you will just get snatched and taken away. You are saved. So much comfort that I feel like I wasn't taught the first few decades of my life. And he's so clear here.
I think I'm going to take a step out of the normal amaze and perplex kind of rhythm we go in and bring in maybe an outside question, necessarily directed to this text, but I think I think it really helps. And not that this is the proof text that most people use for this, but I interviewed for a job one time at a church where like the core defining question they wanted me to affirm was whether I believed in once saved, always saved. And so this is like a big issue. And the question, I think, is both an important question and also sometimes like the wrong question as it pertains to just living. I have thoughts around like this specific passage and how it relates to like our salvation, how sure we can be in it. But like, I just want to ask you what your thoughts are, specifically in relationship to this passage. What you like? What are your thoughts around that issue?
Several. Great question. Number one, I give them eternal life. They don't earn eternal life. Yeah. And it's related in the context. These are the people that know my voice and they want, there's that desire. I talk about it. Do you have the want to, you know? And then, you know, they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. And I think the language here, and there may be more, like you said, there may be other passages that make this more challenging. This one is more clarifying in the sense that he doesn't say you can't leave. He said you won't be snatched. That idea of that's the picture of being taken away against your will, you know, this kind of thing. I think in general, you know, I think the variety of ways that people look at this, it's like, wait a minute, you know, well, what about the person that, so my basic thing would be, hey, if you want God and no matter what you do, when you come up for air, you want God, I think you're still saved, you know? And I base that on the fact that, and David's life is the one that screams the most because David is, I mean, nearly worshipped, you know, in the New Testament. I mean, it's a weird, honestly, the presentation. This is a case I feel like I've made before many times, but it's like the fact that he's there, all, son of David, son of David, son of David to Jesus. I'm like, why are you honoring that guy? You know? And then God, not David, says, oh, no, this is a man after God's own heart. And you're like, well, you mean the guy that murdered, the guy that was a bad parent, all these things, this laundry list of things that I'm like, well, I'm better than that, you know? And I'm like, so why is it recorded? Why all this dirty stuff? And then why is he so honored? And I'm like, this is a picture of the person that won't let go of God.
Yeah. And I even wonder, it's a picture of it's also the opposite side picture of a person that God won't let go of. I think I brought up on the podcast how like I've read some things recently that there's some people that argue the better translation of a man after God's own heart would be a heart who God is after, or something along those lines, where it's much more about God's feelings and actions towards David than in reverse. And yeah, I think that picture of both like the coming up for air metaphor, I think is really good, because I think it's something we can all, most of us can relate to, whether we had a habitual sin or we messed up, or, you know, we had a bad moment and we snapped, or we yelled at our kids or family, or we acted in a bad way, where we come up and realize like, oh yeah, like there was sin, there was failure. I turned away from God. And even in the desire of like the shame or the guilt that you might feel in those moments of acknowledging it is an action of turning back towards God. And so, yeah, I think that's really helpful and clarifying for me. I think the way it's really hard to communicate this is like, that's really good and it speaks to me, but it feels mushy, right? Mm-hmm. Like it feels kind of mushy, because like, well, what happens, you know, Jason, you're a follower of Jesus all your days. Like the question that most people are going to ask, Jason is a follower of Jesus all of his days. He has some sins he doesn't, you know, are bad or wrong or messed up, But then, he really starts drowning in his sin. And before he can come up for air, he's gone. What like, how do we deal with that? And like, again, I think both you and I have answers for that. But what I'm getting at is I think this is one of those things where I think there are definitive answers and ways of thinking about it. But how it plays out in real life is just really mushy and it's really nuanced. And it's messy. There's no clean lines, it feels like.
I think so. And I think it reflects exactly what you said earlier. Even if you're sitting right next to Jesus and you're like, Jesus, am I saved? I think you would come away from that conversation to be like, yeah, he said I'm saved. And then he said like 4 more sentences that I'm going to be processing for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Just because of the depth that's there. I think for me, so how do I maintain my sanity in a world where I may go off the deep end, And I'm like, okay, number one, I have not had any big consequences for my sin yet. I've managed to either hide it or keep it within that relationship, the nature of our relationship, where it's like, man, like 1 John teaches, I confessed it. God is cleaning it. I try to live really open with God. Oh man, what I'm doing right now is sin. Will you help me to figure this out, this kind of thing? So I haven't had seasons in the last 20 something years where I just really lost my way, but I got maybe 20, 30 more years to live. Please, dear Lord, only 20, 30 more years. But so I've got that. So what can happen? I do think it's interesting, the dynamic of God being outside of time and assessing you. You talk about mushy, your batting average is like, David doesn't die victorious to me. He dies, his kids are fighting. He's with some virgin keeping him warm. The whole scenario is like, ugh,
oh, yeah.
Uncomfortable. And yet God is judging it. Now, I'm not suggesting in that scene he's not choosing God still. But in terms of evidence, it doesn't look good. Mm-hmm. Our last big thing from Noah is he's drunk and naked and then cursing his son for noticing he's drunk and naked, or looking. And I'm not critiquing Noah. I'm just saying most of these situations don't end on a high note. And so it's like, so what am I to gather from that? So to protect my own sanity, and I'm saying that as, I'm not saying this is even good theology. I think it is, but it's that, okay, do I believe, regardless of track record, do I believe in God? You know what I mean? Now, if I'm thinking, generally speaking, do I believe in God? And do I want him? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Mm-hmm. I do. And do I want to, and that's the operative term there, believe in what he says about me, that I'm saved and that I'm not going to perish and that I can't be snatched,
Yeah.
And that's me. The one thing he's given us that cannot be taken from us is choice. Our families can be taken from us. Our beliefs can be changed, all these things. But that choice is there, that free will. And so that to me is where there's so much unanswered here. And there truly is.
Yeah.
So what do I do to get through, today's a Wednesday, what do I do to get through this day? And I'm like, I'm choosing Jesus.
Yeah, I think the image, it can toggle between very perplexing and beautiful to me. When it becomes beautiful for me is the idea that like, no, I'm God's. And so that means even if I'm in the midst of drowning in my sin or whatever it may be, if my heart is angled towards him, if my ultimate desire is for him, there's no amount of drowning, there's no amount of pressure, there's no amount of whatever that can stop him from snatching me out of it. And so, yeah, if I can't be snatched from his hand, then that means there's nowhere that he also can't snatch me out of, which is helpful and beautiful. Also still a hard thing. So what perplexes you about this?
Well, I think that's good. To me, that's really, I don't know what I was thinking before you asked that, but I know what I'm thinking now. I think for me, that's satisfying I think it's really important for us to own that Jesus is super confident in what he's saying. And I don't understand. I understand the words he's saying. I don't understand all the application of what he's saying. Furthermore, when I look at the people that God is against, he always, if he gives any rationale to it, it's look at the choices they made again and again and again that didn't want me. And that's including his people. You look in the prophets, including his people who are sacrificing like he told them to, and going to the temple or whatever they had, tabernacle or whatever, like he told them to. So they're doing the right stuff. And he's like, yeah, you're going to be taken into captivity and you're far from me. And my hope for your people is your children's children, because that's when I'm going to, bring about all these beautiful things. And so I'm like, okay, based on the fullness of Scripture, I believe this, how this functions, the way the relationship functions. Simultaneously, I want to always be incredibly humble about God's wisdom is not fully characterized by the Bible. It can't be, because it's endless. And the Bible has confines. There's only so many words, so many concepts presented. And so it's this idea that he's going to teach me better than I know now in the future. And this is kind of the heartbeat of Amaze and Perplex, the very thing we're saying. We want this word that we've read 1,000 times to continue to amaze and perplex us based on the fact he says it's living and active. That also means for me to be amazed and perplexed in the future, that means there's something I'm wrong about now. Because, or else I wouldn't need to be taught. And I think that's the essence. And you made the point years ago, or 7 days ago, who knows? But that idea of God doesn't talk about us as his adult children. We're just his children. And you will eventually talk to, Indigo as your adult child, and that'll be shift in relationship. But God's like, yeah, you're going to mature, but you're still a child, And I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. Terry Rush used to always say, we're always in kindergarten.
Yeah. And so it's so interesting is that image too. And then and the idea of as I just crossed 30, listener. This is the second sober recording as a 30-year-old. So if you notice some more gravitas, more,
I have,
anything to the podcast, that's it. That's what you've noticed. But as I want to think of myself as growing, maturing, which is ultimately true. I think oftentimes God wants to stoop down and pick me up and be like, hey, just keep being like the little kid. Keep being like the little kid. This is what you got to be. In the same way, there can be certainly an unhealthy view of how elderly parents can view their adult children, and only can you know what I'm trying to say, can view them still as infants or as children, and not give them the dignity and respect of being adults. But at the same time, when I've heard about it being good, there's a certain sense in which you look at your adult children and still see the goodness of who they were when they were kids, and remember that time with deep fondness and joy. And honestly, I think about it now with my daughter being 4 years old, and then I'm having a new one in 2 months from now, and recognizing there's a certain period when I'm 50 or 60 or 70 that I'm going to look back at when I'm 30 years old and be like, oh wow, how incredible, this will be the time that I really look back on. And I do wonder sometimes if God is going to look back at me as I try to gain my knowledge and as I try to figure things out. He's like, hey, I'm proud of you now, Connor. I was also proud of you when you were 4 or 5 years old, singing your heart out of VBS. Or I was also just proud of you as 6 years old when you were really proud that you were, somebody who had all the Old Testament books memorized and got to go to Bells at the time, because that's what they did. Again, not that God was more proud of me at that moment when I was 6 years old. But anyways, you know what I'm saying?
I absolutely do. And relating this so I got with Julia, my daughter, who's 23. I got with her yesterday, and we had a time, we're at a coffee shop and just sharing. And then she called me this morning with a question. It's this interesting thing that I can see 2 and 6 and 12 in her, and I can appreciate 20 and 23, and I can look towards even we talked yesterday about, okay, so God's teaching you this now. Where is that at 26 and 30 and 42? And it's like I'm stealing a little bit of God's capturing, maybe is a better word, a little bit of God's perspective on how he looks at us simultaneously. Again, back to this timeless thing. It's impossible for me not to think in terms of time, but to kind of take on, not look at it through worldly eyes, if you will, is that idea of, man, the beauty I see. And maybe I thought when I saw something at 2, it was going to go this direction, but now it's going this other direction. I wonder. And sometimes I can't see the beauty. There are decisions that are made that I'm like, I don't like that for you. I don't think that's good for you. And then simultaneously recognize God's still at work.
Yeah.
And that beauty, it's like our own life. So I didn't think it was going to go this way. To be able to see all those things, there is a real beauty, and it doesn't necessitate that I disrespect where she's at now. Like, oh, I remember when you used to crawl up in my lap, and I diminish our relationship now because we don't have that part. It's like, wait, that's not how I want my life to be. I don't want it to be, well, unless it goes exactly my way. I want to be open to how can God fulfill that same need, the peace, the joy, whatever aspect of the Holy Spirit, or the fruit of the Spirit He was bringing. How can I be open to do that a different way now? And I think that, to me, that captures a bit of that, God looking at 2-year-old Connor, 6-year-old Connor, and being like, man, I love that. I love that relationship, and I love this relationship. And it's not less. It's not in more, but it is different. Like, I don't outgrow it, and I don't become, it's not stale.
That's good. It made me think of, okay, God doesn't love 2-year-old Connor, 6-year-old Connor, 30-year-old Connor, 50-year-old Connor any differently. And like, he's not going to love me more when I'm perfected. And like, I don't know if I'd ever thought about that, but like, that is like that's a weird thought. Like they're in my mind. Maybe I just never even approached the subject, but in my mind, if I were to be like, well, man, I love Jason. I love you so much. But if you were perfected, man, I might love you a little bit more,
of course, yes, right.
And I don't think that would necessarily with my daughter, but like, man, things would be so much easier, and it'd be hard not like, if my daughter didn't have temper tantrums, and if like, she didn't mess with me and didn't,
made her own food.
Yeah, all of it. They're part of me, like, obviously, like, my feelings, but like, man, things would be easier or whatever. But to know that, like, however hard we are on God or how much we grieve Him with our sin, there is no extent to which all those things can be reversed or perfected that would change the capacity of His love for us. And like, I believe that to be true about 2-year-old Connor, 6-year-old Connor, 30-year-old Connor, 50-year-old Connor. But perfected Connor, I don't know if I've ever even begun to think about that.
And I think that's the thing. It's like, you have a right to, you have a right. The Bible establishes a right to. God Himself says through writers, through Jesus, look, you're who I want. Not an ideal version of you, but you're right now who I want. Not denying your sin. But it's the weirdest thing when He's like, yeah, it's I've forgotten. It's like the East from the West. Like, I can't hardly think of myself without immediately thinking about my sin. And He's like, what if I already see you as your ideal self? And that's like, I don't understand nothing. Like, I need to just stop. So
I don't know, God.
Yeah, exactly. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Okay. I have a perplexion. The last bit of our reading, Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And this is kind of, He's ramping up to answering their question of, how long will you keep us in suspense? Tell us plainly. And He comes back and He goes like, hey, your perception of like one, in a way, yes, but actually even more so than you ever possibly imagined, because like the Jew at the time did not conceive that the average Jew at the time, in my understanding, did not conceive the Messiah would be God, would be of the same essence of the Father. That was not. I do not think. I think you can see it in the Old Testament. I think we can see the Holy Spirit working in the Old Testament writers and see that. And yet, like, I don't think that was the expectation for the Jew at the time. And so Jesus comes back and He answers it like really profoundly, and just like he goes even further than the question they ask. And we'll read next week how they react to that. What's so interesting to me is like, Jesus is asked a defining question, and there's really no wiggle room. And it's so fascinating to me how He has this big kind of ramp up to His yes and that He gives them. And it's just really interesting to ponder Jesus this way. As somebody, like, I have not been confronted with, Connor, are you saying you're the savior of your country and of the universe, and answer plainly. But I have been in situations where it's like, hey, a lot rides on your answer here. And so Jesus having like, this has to be incredibly meaningful for Him. Like, the immediately preceding words to this have to be something that Jesus has pondered, prayed, and thought about a lot. And so like, I am just perplexed and wondering and trying to imagine the sort of weight that Jesus is feeling in these answers, especially as He's walking through. And there's the reminder of Hanukkah. I just find myself, perplexed is the right word, I think, because it's hard for me to fathom Jesus. It's hard to fathom the sort of headspace Jesus would be in, the sort of feelings He would feel. And also, and also how to answer this question truthfully, and not have regrets about it. And I think that's the perplexing part for me, is how powerful the answer is, how Jesus approaches these things to speak in a way that's true and not have regrets. And so, yeah, there's a mixture of things that are perplexing me, but I think it ultimately comes down to like the headspace that Jesus is in, the immensity for which his answer he's about to give, and like how he goes about that. And like, I want more of that, like always.
Yeah. Just to maybe approach it a tiny bit different way, they're asking, "Are you the Messiah?" And he said, "Yes." I mean, I think that's pretty clear. And then he keeps on. He's like, "I'm not just the Messiah. Mm-hmm. I am God." And I don't know, and this truly, I don't know. Did they perceive Messiah as God? I think of him as anointed by God mm-hmm. for a purpose of God.
Sure.
But this is bigger than their question.
Yeah, my understanding is certainly the average Jew would not have expected that.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, can't you leave well enough alone? That I think I would say that to Jesus all the time. If I was like his buddy from high school, I'd be like, all you had to do was just heal the lady and not make a big deal out of it. Or all you had to do was just answer the question at hand,
Yeah, all you had to be like, well, you said it. Other people said it. Something like he could leave, or even he could leave with more followers. If he just says yes, and then he's got suddenly people who are ready for another revolt, so another, whatever.
Right. They make up your mind.
Well,
here's the answer.
Here's the answer. And I do think I've always been really interested in like, and when somebody gets saved or somebody chooses to follow Jesus, how much, and again, I think God has immense grace. And I think God is going to give people the right tools, and he's going to judge them based on where they were when they were. But I'm always fascinated by people who will make a decision to follow Jesus. And like, it's either like a rushed decision, maybe a highly manipulated decision, opportunity to make that decision. And I would think, here, I've been in many churches, many settings where it's like, these people are like, they're ready. Like, hey, do you believe Jesus is the Messiah? I know many people in churches that were like, hey, do you believe Jesus is the Messiah? You're willing to go along with that? It's done. We're good. Hey, everyone, let's get the water out. We're going forward, and we're putting in our annual count for baptisms. And I think it's just really interesting to think about. Jesus is not satisfied with them only getting a small picture of who he is. And ultimately, and again, I don't want to necessarily equate this to like all new converts now or whatever, but I do wonder, sometimes like you can never fully appreciate early on the immensity of what you're committing to and who God is and who Jesus was for you. Just like I can't understand right now, 12 years on in following Jesus. And hopefully like I'll have more capacity to understand 10, 20, 30 years from now. But on the other hand, I think about like, sometimes would it be more loving if somebody goes like, yeah, I can believe Jesus Messiah. Like, really? Like, can you really like, do you understand how much that entails? And so, it's not perplexing to me that Jesus takes this route. Maybe it's convicting, or it's directive is the wrong word. I just find it intriguing.
Yeah, I totally see that. And I think in general, this idea of, and we mentioned this, I feel like a little bit earlier, but that idea of being, if you were right next to Jesus, and I feel like we've said this a bunch over the years, but if you're next to Jesus, life doesn't get clearer. And at the very least, if you're like, man, I'm with him, he's the Messiah, like you're for him. Mm-hmm. And then you hear him say, oh, also, you didn't ask me this, but I'm God.
Yeah.
I am equal to God. It's like, yeah, we didn't ask you that.
Yeah.
And their response, and you talk about a perplexing piece. We're about to enter one of the more perplexing pieces for me in the Bible in this next session, and I'm making commitment. I'm not going to go study it beforehand. I'm going to be in my full confused state next episode. But it is that idea. It's like you are just setting yourself up for so much unnecessary trouble.
Yeah.
And I think if he was right here today, I'd feel the same way.
That's so good. I just want to, we can leave it at here. After you spoke there, I had even further perplexion. Jesus, for whatever reason, is not satisfied with it. Yes, I am the Messiah, and whatever it comes from these people. Jesus is also at the same time more than okay with the disciples not fully understanding him and getting what it means.
That's right.
Throughout his life. And it's like, okay, like I got some ideas and I got some thoughts like always. And yet it's like, if I'm those guys, I'm like, in my mind, am I being like, well, you gave more grace to Peter, you know, because then you gave to us. You didn't give like, and so like, or it's like, well, if you told Peter early on, like, hey, come be fishers, man. Also, just a heads up, you know, like Yahweh. So there's this whole deal where it's like, okay, there's a spirit. You saw him hover. You'll see him hover at some point. Him, me, God, all the same, but not. And you know, like there's a sense here in which, like, I do wonder, like, if the Jews hearing this, and again, like, I trust God, I trust Jesus. Like, you got to work through this, and yet I'm so like, man, I feel like if you'd given this much to Peter this early, he would not have handled it well.
Yeah, I think that is always true. That and you know this, if you love somebody, you recognize if you give them more than they can handle, even if it's useful things, it will become unloving. Mm-hmm. And I think he's really, really good at giving them stuff. And I think they're really, really like me in receiving that stuff, that they receive it piecemeal. They don't understand. And I mean, as we go through this, you know, the Gospels, and I'm sure if you've read the Gospels before, you've seen this, listener, but it's that idea. It's that they show signs all the time of not getting what Jesus is saying. By they, I mean the 12 disciples show signs over and over again up until the time he ascends. And that part right there, I hope that encourages you. I hope it does. That he's not about, well, once you understand, then I'll love you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once you understand, then you'll be unsnatchable. Once you understand. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That is a good reminder that I can also say that about me. It's not about once I understand. It's not about once I have it all figured out. Then I can't be snatched. Whatever from God's hand.
Can't be snatched.
Right now. I am unsnatchable. And tune in next week as we launch our spin-off podcast, the Unsnatchables. Unsnatchables. Grace, peace, and love.